Hey, Dennis, thanks for coming back on the show.
Glad to be back. Glad to be back. Thanks for having me.
I have some really bad news, though.
Oh no, what is it?
Sales does not trust you.
Oh, I knew that all along, man.
We've always known that there's a big credibility gap. 70% of the content we create for sellers doesn't get used, sits on the shelf. Why do they not use the content? One, they don't know where to find it, or there's no single source of truth, so they just kind of use their own. But I think the biggest one that we don't talk about enough is that sellers actually don't have confidence to use the content effectively. B2B Decision Labs set up a behavioral study with 300 sellers. They took product marketers, they took sales leaders, and then they took top performing reps, and they had them all introduce a new piece of content to the sales team because they wanted to see which person delivering the content would make the biggest difference where you'd actually see higher adoption. And then they went a step further and they also tested what happens if you just hand over the content with a very basic description of how to use it. What happens if you hand it over and you include a case study about how this content actually helps a prospect or a customer? And then what happens if you hand it over along with an example of what good looks like? An example of a top performing rep actually role playing them delivering the content to a prospect. And the results were fascinating. When a high performing seller delivers the content, you can see how superior that is compared to a product manager or product marketer.
Who are you going to trust more? Someone else that used a talk track and closed a deal, or someone in marketing that created the talk track in isolation? I think the answer is pretty clear. We had a hunch, but now we got data to back it up.
And what's interesting is that a sales leader also wasn't as effective, even though this is the leader of the sales team. They also have a little bit less credibility than a top performing rep, which makes sense, right? Like you want to look at someone that's doing exactly what you're doing and they make their money the same way as you make your money and they're doing it well. That's who you're going to go to for advice, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we're also seeing here is a sort of evolution in the world of sales. We've really progressed from consultative selling and sort of lone wolf experts that educate the prospect to packs of sellers, right? Groups of sellers that collaborate together, that learn from each other, that share best practices with one another. So what can marketers do here? I think the process just needs to change. I've said this for a very long time, but sellers need to be seen as the extended members of the enablement family. So product marketers need to have that additional step of actually starting from the ground up when they create that story and when they vet that story. And also when they actually release that story into the wild. It needs to be a partnership between marketing and sales, right? It can't be in a silo with executive teams and other people that are on their soapbox.
Hero ball does not work. It starts at creation. This partnership with sales, you need their input at the beginning. Actually, before you begin, you should be aligning with sales on what is the purpose of this content, what is the context in which it's going to be used, which personas or company sizes should we be focused on, which industries, so that you can tailor that content appropriately or create multiple versions so that it's relevant. For example, if you're selling into financial services, you don't want to use the word seller because they don't use that nomenclature. It's not hard, but a simple tweak like that can make the difference between whether a seller uses the content or doesn't use the content. And then partner with sales when you roll this out, because you see a 61% better chance of sellers adopting the content if a top performing rep is delivering it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a little tricky though, right? Because let's be honest, I mean, sellers' most valuable asset is their time, and pulling them out of that, prospecting and needs discovery and sales motion is really difficult, right? So we have to be really mindful about how we work with sales and how we respect their time as marketers, right? We can't be doing like full day workshops of building a story together, right? I mean, that's a little unrealistic.
So, Dennis, not only is it critical that marketing is partnering with sales and using a top performing rep to roll out content, but it's also how you roll that content out. Now, the data shows in this study that when you roll out a piece of new sales collateral with an example of what good looks like, or what they call a demo, then you are going to see twice the adoption, 2x, when a product marketer delivers that content versus a top performing rep. That's insane. I mean, double the adoption.
Well, I mean, nobody wants to be the guinea pig, right? I mean, you think about, a new version of your story that rolls out, and I mean, it's obvious, right? No one's really tested it in front of a prospect. So if you can overcome that credibility gap by saying, hey, a top performing rep actually delivered this to a prospect, and here's how the prospect reacted, and it resulted in a next step or a closed won deal or a success.
I mean, sometimes it takes a little while before you have those success recordings, but a role play, right? A top performing rep just doing a practice session where, they're role playing and delivering that content. That might not be a proof point that the content works, but it is going to give a newer seller a roadmap and an example to follow. And it's not like they have to copy every word that the top performing rep says.
In complex B2B sales or even B2C sales for that matter, I mean, you really never want to give someone a script. You want to give them, the general direction and the flow and the story arc, and have them bring some of their own personality and flair to the table. When you don't see some of those top performers in action, you might think that they're flawless. They never say ums and buts or ahs, but when you actually see them deliver and be almost human, right? It normalizes it, makes it more achievable, and actually motivates the team to say, oh, I could do that, right? And it's okay if I mess up a little bit along the way. I'm still going to succeed, and I'm still going to close a deal, or I'm still going to advance the conversation. So it almost like normalizes and makes the sales process a little bit more human, which I really like as well.
So marketers, stop doing it on your own. Partner with sales, particularly a top performing sales rep, and make sure that there's an example of what good looks like that goes along with the content. You're going to see a 111% increase in adoption if you do those two things.
Absolutely. And I'm going to say the same thing to sales, by the way. Sellers, don't do it on your own. Partner up with your other peers, learn from them, collaborate, and share ideas with one another, because that's going to set you apart from the competition.